"He touched me, then cast me aside," whispered the native girl, and the rancher swore she'd never be left again. The dust cloud on the horizon meant only one thing in these parts: trouble. Was riding toward Copper Ridge, but as 20-year-old Ayanna pressed her back against the weathered barn wall, her heart hammered for reasons that had nothing to do with the approaching riders. In her trembling hands, she clutched a letter that would either save her people or destroy everything she had ever known. 3 months earlier, the morning sun had painted the Arizona territory in shades of gold and crimson when Ayanna first saw him. She was gathering wild herbs near the creek that separated her tribe's land from the sprawling Meridian Ranch when the sound of hoofbeats made her freeze. Through the cottonwood trees, she watched a man dismount from his black stallion, his weathered hat casting shadows across features that seemed carved from the same red stone as the surrounding mesas. Cole Meridian moved with the quiet confidence of someone who owned everything his eyes could see, and in truth, he nearly did. At 30, he had built his ranch into the largest operation in the territory, but success had come at a cost that weighed heavier on his shoulders with each passing year. The locals whispered about his ruthless business dealings, about the smaller ranchers who had mysteriously decided to sell their land after midnight visits from his men. But Ayanna saw something different in the way he knelt by the water's edge, the careful gentleness with which he let his horse drink. When their eyes met across the narrow creek, neither moved for a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity. The Apache girl stood motionless as a deer, her long black hair catching the morning light like strands of silk. Her dress, a mixture of traditional beadwork and practical cotton, marked her as someone caught between two worlds, the ancient ways of her people and the encroaching reality of white settlement. Cole had seen many native women in the trading posts and missions, but none who carried themselves with such quiet dignity. Neither spoke that first morning. Cole mounted his horse and rode away without acknowledgment, but something had shifted in the careful balance that kept their worlds apart. 3 days later, he returned to the same spot, ostensibly to water his horse. Ayanna was there again, her basket half filled with medicinal plants her grandmother had taught her to recognize. This time, when Cole approached the creek, he spoke. His voice carried the rough edges of a man more accustomed to giving orders than making conversation. "Morning, miss. Don't mind me. Just letting Thunder here get his fill." Ayanna nodded once, her dark eyes never leaving his face. She had learned English at the mission school before her father pulled her away, declaring that his daughter would not forget the ways of their people for the white man's words. But she understood every syllable Cole spoke, and more importantly, she heard what he did not say, the loneliness that echoed beneath his confident exterior. Days passed in this delicate dance of acknowledgement and distance. Cole would arrive at the creek, always with some practical excuse. Ayanna would continue her work, gradually moving closer to the water's edge. Neither made the first move to cross the invisible boundary that separated their worlds, but both felt its pull growing stronger. The spell was broken on a Tuesday morning when Ayanna's younger brother, Nalnish, came crashing through the underbrush in a panic. The 12-year-old boy spoke rapidly in Apache, his words tumbling over each other as he gestured toward the main ranch road. Cole, who had been studying Ayanna's profile while pretending to examine his horse's shoes, straightened as he caught the boy's fear. "What's wrong?" Cole asked, surprising himself with the concern in his voice. Ayanna looked at him directly for the first time, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the worry beneath. "My brother says men are coming. White men with papers. They wear the badges of territorial government. The territorial commissioners had been making their rounds, backed by new federal legislation that granted them sweeping powers over native lands. Cole knew their methods arrive with official documents, demand immediate compliance, and use force when cooperation was not forthcoming. He also knew that Ayanna's small band lived on a parcel of land that several developers had been eyeing for months. Without conscious thought, Cole found himself wading across the shallow creek. The water was cold against his leather boots, but not as cold as the fear in Ayana's eyes. For the first time, they stood on the same side of the boundary that had defined their careful relationship. "How long do you have?" he asked. Ayana translated quickly for her brother, who held up 3 fingers and pointed toward the sun's position in the sky. 3 hours, she said. Maybe less. Cole's mind raced through possibilities and consequences. He owned more land than any single man had a right to, and his political connections ran deep enough to provide certain protections. But helping Ayana would mean making enemies of powerful men who already viewed his success with suspicion. "There might be something I can do," he said finally, "but it would mean trusting me. Really trusting me." The weight of the decision showed in every line of Ayana's face. Her people had been betrayed by white promises before, had seen treaties signed and broken before the ink was dry. But something in Cole's steady gaze made her believe that this man was different. "What do you need?" she asked. Cole's plan was risky but simple. If Ayana's people were willing to relocate temporarily to a section of his ranch, he could claim they were working for him as guides and translators. The territorial commissioners had authority over unoccupied native lands, but they could not legally remove workers from private property without substantial cause and lengthy proceedings. Ayana translated the proposal for Nalnish, who ran back toward their settlement to bring word to the elders. Cole and Ayana stood in silence beside the creek, both aware that the next few hours would change everything between them. "Why?" Ayana asked finally. "Why would you risk this for people you do not know?" Cole removed his hat and ran his fingers through hair prematurely gray from years of hard living and harder choices. The honest answer was too complicated and too dangerous to speak aloud. He was tired of being the man everyone feared, tired of building his empire on the ruins of other people's dreams. But more than that, something about this woman made him want to be the kind of man who deserved her trust. "Maybe because it's the right thing to do," he said. "Maybe because I'm tired of being the kind of man who looks the other way." Within 2 hours, a small caravan of Apache families appeared at the southern boundary of Cole's ranch. They moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had learned to pack their lives into whatever they could carry. Ayana walked beside her grandmother, an ancient woman whose face told stories of hardships Cole could barely imagine. The territorial commissioners arrived exactly when Nalnish had predicted, riding hard and trailing dust that could be seen from miles away. Cole met them at his front gate, flanked by his foreman and 2 of his most trusted ranch hands. The lead commissioner, a thin man named Hartwell with the pallor of someone who spent too much time behind desks, produced a sheaf of official papers. "Mr. Meridian, we have reports of illegal native settlement on property adjacent to your holdings. We require access to your land to pursue our investigation." Cole kept his expression neutral as he examined the documents. "I don't see any illegal settlement, Commissioner. Just my employees going about their business." Hartwell's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the Apache families visible in the distance. "Those are not employees, sir. They are unauthorized natives occupying territory designated for relocation. They are guides, translators, and seasonal workers," Cole replied evenly. "I have contracts with each family head, properly filed with the Territorial Land Office as of yesterday morning." This was not entirely true. Cole had spent most of the previous night forging the necessary paperwork with the help of his lawyer in Tucson, who owed him several substantial favors. But the documents would pass casual inspection, and challenging them would require legal proceedings that could take months. The standoff lasted nearly an hour, with Hartwell growing more frustrated as Cole calmly deflected every attempt to gain access to his property. Finally, the commissioner wheeled his horse around and departed with promises to return with federal marshals and superior legal authority. As the dust cloud of the departing commissioners disappeared over the horizon, Cole found himself walking toward the temporary camp where Ayana's people had set up their shelters. The arrangement was meant to be temporary, a few weeks at most, while lawyers sorted through the legal complications. But Cole discovered that having the Apache families on his ranch brought a sense of life and purpose he had not experienced in years. Ayanna proved invaluable as a translator during negotiations with other native groups, helping Cole establish trade relationships that benefited everyone involved. Her knowledge of plants and traditional medicine helped his cowboys treat everything from saddle sores to serious injuries. Most importantly, her presence forced Cole to examine the methods he had used to build his empire. The changes were subtle at first. Cole found himself paying fairer wages to his workers, extending more generous terms to neighboring ranchers who needed assistance during difficult seasons. The feared reputation that had once opened doors through intimidation gradually gave way to something more valuable: genuine respect. But the fragile peace could not last forever. Word of Cole's arrangement with the Apache families had spread throughout the territory, making enemies of men who saw his actions as betrayal of white interests. Anonymous threats arrived regularly, warning of consequences for his native sympathizing. Several of his business partnerships were abruptly terminated, and banks that had once competed for his loans suddenly found reasons to decline his applications. The crisis came to a head on a September evening when Cole returned from checking his northern pastures to find Ayanna waiting by the main house, her face tight with worry. She carried news that would test everything they had built together. "There is going to be trouble," she said without preamble. "My cousin works in the territorial office in Phoenix. He says Commissioner Hartwell has convinced a federal judge to issue new papers. They are coming back, but this time with soldiers." Cole felt the familiar weight of difficult decisions settling on his shoulders. He had known this moment would come eventually, the point where protecting Ayanna and her people would require him to choose between his conscience and his survival. When? He asked. 3 days, maybe 4. But Cole, there is something else. Ayanna's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "They know about us." The words hit Cole like a physical blow. He and Ayanna had been careful to maintain appropriate boundaries in public, but their growing closeness had not gone unnoticed. In a territory where relationships between white men and native women were viewed with suspicion at best, their connection represented a vulnerability that his enemies would eagerly exploit. "What exactly did they know?" Cole asked. Ayanna reached into her dress and withdrew a folded paper. "This was left at my family's shelter this morning." Cole unfolded the note and read words that made his blood run cold. The message was brief but clear, unless he immediately expelled all Apache families from his land and ceased all contact with them. Certain photographs would be distributed to newspapers throughout the territory. The implications were devastating. Even if the photographs were fabricated or taken out of context, the scandal would destroy his business and make him a target for vigilante violence. But the note also contained a more personal threat. If Cole refused to comply, Ayanna would face charges of seducing a white man for the purpose of stealing territorial secrets. In the current political climate, such charges could result in her imprisonment or worse. Cole crumpled the paper in his fist, rage and helplessness warring in his chest. He had built his success by always staying one step ahead of his enemies, by never allowing himself to be cornered. But love, and he could no longer deny that what he felt for Ayanna was love, had made him vulnerable in ways he had never experienced. "We have to end this," Ayanna said quietly. "You have already risked too much." Cole looked into her eyes and saw the same pain he felt reflected there. She was prepared to sacrifice their relationship to protect him, just as he was prepared to sacrifice everything to keep her safe. The irony was not lost on him in trying to save each other. They were both choosing to destroy what they had found together. "No," Cole said firmly, "I am not letting them win. Not this time." The decision formed in his mind with crystalline clarity. For years, he had accumulated wealth and power through careful calculation and strategic compromise. He had become the kind of man who could buy his way out of any problem and intimidate his way through any obstacle. But some things could not be bought or threatened into submission. Some things required a man to stand and fight, regardless of the cost. The next morning, Cole sent word to his lawyer in Tucson, instructing him to liquidate certain assets and prepare for extended legal battles. He also sent messages to every ranch hand, trader, and businessman who owed him favors, calling in debts that had been accumulating for years. If Hartwell wanted a war, Cole would give him one fought with the same ruthless efficiency that had built the Meridian Ranch. But even as he prepared for battle, Cole knew that victory would come at a price that might prove too high to bear. The territory was changing, and men like him, men caught between the old ways and the new, would eventually be forced to choose which side of history they wanted to occupy. As he watched Ayanna teaching her young cousins to tend the vegetable garden she had planted behind the main house, Cole realized that his choice had already been made. Whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, he would not abandon the woman who had shown him how to be the man he had always wanted to become. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted his thoughts, and Cole turned to see his foreman riding hard toward the house. The expression on the man's weathered face told Cole everything he needed to know. Their time had run out. Jake Morrison had worked for Cole for 8 years, surviving range wars, droughts, and economic downturns through unwavering loyalty and an uncanny ability to sense trouble before it arrived. Now, as he dismounted near the front porch, his usual calm demeanor had been replaced by barely controlled urgency. "Boss, we got problems," Jake said, removing his hat to wipe sweat from his forehead. "Big problems. Riders coming from 3 directions. Looks like they mean to surround the ranch." Cole felt his stomach tighten. "How many? 40, maybe 50 men. Some wearing territorial badges, some federal. But boss, there's others with them. Men I recognize from the vigilante groups down in Tombstone." The implications were staggering. Official government forces working alongside vigilante groups meant that legal protections no longer mattered. This was not a law enforcement action. It was a coordinated assault designed to end Cole's defiance once and for all. Ayanna appeared at Cole's side, having heard Jake's report. Her face remained composed, but Cole could see the fear she was trying to hide. Behind her, other members of her family began to gather, their eyes fixed on the dust clouds visible on the horizon. "How much time do we have?" Cole asked. Jake squinted toward the approaching riders. "Hour at most, probably less. They are moving fast and coordinated. This is not some hastily organized posse." Cole's mind raced through limited options. The ranch house was defensible, but not against 50 determined men. Escape was possible for small groups, but protecting 40 Apache men, women, and children across open desert would be virtually impossible. Fighting would likely result in a massacre that would give their enemies justification for even more extreme measures. But surrender was equally dangerous. Once Hartwell had Cole and the Apache families in custody, there would be no legal recourse, no appeals process. The territorial government could relocate the natives to any reservation they chose, and Cole would face charges that could result in years of imprisonment. "Jake, get the men together," Cole ordered. "Every hand who is willing to fight. Set up defensive positions around the main buildings, but do not engage unless they fire first." As Jake rode off to rally the ranch hands, Cole turned to Ayanna. "You need to take your people and go. Head north toward the canyon country. There are places to hide until this passes." Ayanna shook her head firmly. "We will not run again. My grandmother is too old for another forced march, and there are children who cannot travel fast enough. Besides, running now just proves their accusations that we are criminals." The wisdom in her words was undeniable, but Cole knew the cost of staying would be measured in lives. He had seen what happened when territorial forces decided to make examples of native groups who refused to comply with relocation orders. The reports were always sanitized in official documents, but the reality was often brutal. "This is my fight," Cole said desperately. "You do not have to pay the price for my choices." Ayanna stepped closer, her hand briefly touching his arm in a gesture that could have been casual comfort, but felt like so much more. You made this fight ours when you chose to help us. We will not abandon you now. The approaching dust clouds were closer now, close enough to make out individual riders. Cole could see the glint of sunlight on rifle barrels and the flutter of official flags. At the head of the procession rode Commissioner Hartwell, his thin frame rigid with righteous authority. Cole walked to his gun cabinet and removed the Winchester rifle that had served him through countless dangerous situations. The weapon felt familiar and reassuring in his hands, but he knew that shooting his way out of this confrontation would only make him the outlaw his enemies claimed he already was. A young Apache warrior named Chaska approached Cole with quiet determination. Despite being only 17, Chaska had already earned respect among his people for his skill as a hunter and tracker. Now he carried his grandfather's old cavalry rifle, taken from a soldier during the Apache Wars decades earlier. "We fight together," Chaska said in carefully pronounced English. "My family owes you protection. Honor demands payment." Similar scenes were playing out throughout the compound as Apache men prepared to defend their temporary home alongside Cole's ranch hands. The unlikely alliance that had begun with a desperate gamble was about to be tested in the crucible of actual combat. Cole positioned himself at the main house window that offered the best view of the approaching riders. Ayanna remained beside him, her presence both comforting and terrifying. If shooting began, she would be in immediate danger, but Cole knew better than to ask her to leave. Her people were here, and she would not abandon them regardless of personal risk. The procession halted just outside rifle range, close enough for conversation but far enough to avoid immediate confrontation. Commissioner Hartwell dismounted and walked forward alone, a white cloth tied to his rifle barrel in a mockery of peaceful intention. "Cole Meridian," Hartwell called out, his voice carrying clearly across the dusty yard. "By authority of the territorial government and the United States Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs, I order you to surrender yourself and all native persons currently harboring on your property." Cole stepped onto the front porch, making himself visible but keeping his rifle ready. "Commissioner Hartwell, these people are here legally as my employees. I have documentation filed with proper authorities." Hartwell laughed, the sound bitter and mocking. "Your forged documents have been reviewed and rejected. These natives are illegally avoiding mandatory relocation, and you are charged with obstruction of federal law enforcement." The accusation of forgery stung because it was partially true, but Cole had long ago learned that survival sometimes required bending rules that were themselves unjust. "I want to see warrants," he called back. "Proper legal documentation for any arrests." In response, Hartwell gestured toward the mounted men behind him. "There is your warrant, Meridian. 50 rifles and the authority of the territorial government. You have 10 minutes to comply before we take this ranch by force." The ultimatum hung in the air like desert heat, shimmering with implied violence. Cole knew that Hartwell meant every word. The commissioner had built his career on brutal efficiency. In dealing with what he termed native problems, compromise was not part of his vocabulary. But as Cole looked at the faces around him, ranch hands who had chosen to stay despite the danger, Apache families who trusted him with their lives, and especially Ayanna, whose quiet strength had changed everything he thought he knew about himself, he realized that some stands had to be taken regardless of the odds. "Commissioner," Cole called back, his voice carrying the authority he had learned from years of command. "You want these people, you will have to come through me to get them. And I guarantee that will not be as easy as you think." The challenge was unmistakable, and Cole could see Hartwell's face reddening with rage even at a distance. The commissioner had expected capitulation, had counted on Cole's business instincts overruling his conscience. The defiance clearly caught him off guard. Hartwell remounted his horse and rode back to confer with his men. Cole could see animated discussions and gestures toward the ranch buildings. Whatever they were planning, it would not be subtle. "They will try to burn us out," Ayanna said quietly, having observed the same tactical discussions. Fire is their favorite weapon against native settlements, Cole nodded grimly. The ranch buildings were mostly wood construction, dry from months of desert sun. A few well-placed torches could turn their defensive advantage into a death trap, but fleeing the buildings would expose everyone to rifle fire from the surrounding attackers. Jake, Cole called to his foreman, get everyone into the stone root cellar behind the main house. It is the only building that will not burn. The root cellar had been built into a natural depression, its thick stone walls designed to keep food cool during brutal summer months. It was not spacious, but it would provide protection from both fire and bullets for the 40-plus people now depending on Cole's leadership. As families began moving toward the cellar, Cole caught sight of something that made his blood freeze. Among Hartwell's men, he recognized several faces from wanted posters, known criminals who had been given territorial badges in exchange for their services. This was not law enforcement. It was legalized lynching. The attack began without warning. Riders spread out in a wide circle around the ranch buildings, firing systematically into windows and doors. The sound of shattering glass mixed with the crack of rifle shots and the terrified cries of children being hustled toward safety. Cole returned fire from the main house window, his shots carefully aimed to discourage rather than kill. But as burning arrows began arcing through the air toward the wooden structures, he knew that restraint would not save them. The barn caught fire first, its dry hay creating an inferno that sent smoke billowing across the entire compound. Fighting his way through thickening smoke, Cole reached the root cellar where 43 people huddled in a space meant for storing vegetables. The stone walls provided blessed protection from the gunfire, but the air was growing thick and breathing difficult. Ayanna appeared beside him in the smoky darkness, her face streaked with ash but her eyes blazing with determination. "There is another way out," she whispered. "The old mine tunnel that connects to the cellar. My brother found it yesterday while exploring." Cole had forgotten about the abandoned silver mine that honeycombed the hills behind his ranch. If the tunnel was still passable, it might provide an escape route that their attackers did not know about. But getting 43 people through an unknown underground passage would be dangerous under the best circumstances. Outside, the sound of gunfire was lessening as the wooden buildings became fully engulfed in flames. Cole knew that Hartwell's men would soon advance to check for survivors, and the stone cellar would not remain hidden for long. "Show me," he told Ayanna. The tunnel entrance was concealed behind wooden storage shelves that had been built against the back wall of the cellar. Nalnish had discovered it while looking for a place to hide during the attack, his small size allowing him to squeeze through gaps that adults might have missed. Cole peered into the narrow opening and felt claustrophobia grip his chest. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person, its ceiling so low that most adults would have to crawl. But it represented their only chance of escaping the trap that the ranch had become. "I will go first," Cole decided. "If the tunnel is passable, I will send word back. Then we move everyone through one at a time." Ayanna grabbed his arm as he prepared to enter the tunnel. "If something happens to you, what becomes of us?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond immediate survival. Cole realized that in protecting Ayanna's people, he had become something he had never expected, their leader in a way that transcended legal documents or employment contracts. "Then you lead them," he said simply. "You know these lands better than I do, and they trust you. Get them to the Navajo territory. My friend Samuel Begay will help." Before Ayanna could protest, Cole squeezed into the tunnel opening. The passage was even more constricting than it had appeared, forcing him to crawl on hands and knees through darkness that seemed absolute. Behind him, he could hear the muffled sounds of the continuing attack, punctuated by the occasional shout of his name from searchers who had discovered the cellar entrance. The tunnel stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Cole's knees were raw and his shoulders aching when he finally saw a faint glimmer of daylight ahead. The exit opened into a narrow canyon nearly a quarter mile from the ranch buildings, concealed by desert scrub and shadows. Cole emerged into blessed fresh air and immediately began planning the evacuation. The tunnel was passable but dangerous. One person getting stuck could trap everyone behind them. They would have to move quickly and quietly, with no guarantee that Hartwell's men had not posted sentries in the surrounding hills. But as Cole prepared to signal the all-clear, he heard something that made his heart stop, the sound of approaching hoofbeats from multiple directions. Hartwell's men had not been content to simply burn the ranch. They were conducting a systematic search of the surrounding area, and they were getting closer to the tunnel exit. Trapped between the advancing searchers and the people depending on him for salvation, Cole realized that their desperate gamble might have only bought them minutes instead of freedom. The letter Ayanna had been clutching at the story's beginning, the one that could either save her people or destroy everything, suddenly seemed like their last hope. But that letter, and the secrets it contained, remained hidden in the chaos of the burning ranch, waiting for someone brave enough to retrieve it before Commissioner Hartwell's men discovered its existence. The letter that would save them all lay hidden in the most dangerous place imaginable, Cole's burning ranch house, tucked inside the very desk where Commissioner Hartwell's men were now searching for evidence of his alleged crimes. Cole pressed himself against the canyon wall as mounted searchers passed within yards of the tunnel entrance. Their voices carried clearly in the desert air, discussing plans to dynamite any caves or mine shafts they discovered. Time was running out faster than water through cracked stone. But the letter represented more than just potential salvation. It contained proof of a conspiracy that reached all the way to Washington, evidence that could destroy Hartwell and the network of corrupt officials who had been systematically stealing native lands for personal profit. 3 days before the attack, Ayanna had received an unexpected visitor. Her cousin Marcus, who worked as a janitor in the territorial offices, had risked everything to bring her documents he had discovered while emptying waste baskets after late-night meetings. The papers detailed a scheme involving forged relocation orders, bribed judges, and land sales that violated every treaty the government had signed. More damning still, the documents revealed that Hartwell had been selling relocated Apache families to mining companies as unpaid labor, essentially creating a system of legalized slavery under the guise of federal authority. Marcus had copied the most crucial pages before returning the originals, but he knew discovery was inevitable. Now, as Cole listened to the searchers discussing their next moves, he realized that retrieving those documents was not just about saving Ayanna's people, it was about exposing a corruption that had destroyed dozens of native communities throughout the territory. The decision formed with crystalline clarity. Cole would have to go back. He made his way through the tunnel's claustrophobic darkness, arriving at the cellar to find organized chaos. Ayanna had taken charge of the evacuation preparations, dividing the families into groups small enough to navigate the narrow passage. Her grandmother, too frail for the journey, sat quietly in the corner with the stoic acceptance of someone who had survived too much to fear death. "The letter," Cole whispered urgently to Ayanna. "Where exactly did you hide it?" Her eyes widened with understanding. "In your desk, third drawer, hidden behind the false back panel." "But Cole, the house is surrounded. Going back is suicide." "Not going back means all of this was for nothing," Cole replied. "Those documents can destroy Hartwell and everyone backing him. Without them, even if we escape, they will just hunt us down." Jake Morrison appeared beside them, his weathered face grim but determined. "Boss, I have been listening to their search patterns. They are working systematic, but there is maybe a 10-minute window when the house will be clear. After that, they post permanent guards." The window of opportunity was narrowing to nothing, but Cole knew this might be their only chance. He checked his pistol and prepared for what could be a suicide mission. "If I do not come back," Cole began, but Ayanna cut him off. "You will come back, and I will be here waiting." The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning, a promise that acknowledged everything they had not been able to say during their carefully maintained public distance. Cole reached out and briefly touched her hand, a gesture that felt like both greeting and farewell. The journey back through the tunnel seemed longer this time, each scrape of his knees against stone echoing too loudly in the confined space. When he finally emerged into the root cellar, the sounds of searching had moved toward the barn ruins, leaving the main house temporarily unguarded. Cole slipped from shadow to shadow, using smoke from the still-burning outbuildings as cover. The front door of his house hung open, its frame blackened but still intact. Inside, he could see the systematic destruction that accompanied official searches, overturned furniture, scattered papers, and the accumulated possessions of 8 years reduced to debris. His desk stood in the center of the chaos, its drawers yanked out and contents dumped across the floor. But the searchers had been looking for obvious hiding places, not the subtle craftsmanship that concealed the false panel Ayanna had discovered during her secretarial work. Cole's fingers found the hidden catch, and the panel slid aside to reveal the folded documents that could change everything. As he tucked the papers inside his shirt, voices outside announced the return of the search party. "Check the house one more time," Hartwell's voice carried through the broken windows. "If Meridian is alive, he will come back for something." Men like him always have secrets worth retrieving. The irony was not lost on Cole. Hartwell's insight was absolutely correct, but the commissioner had no idea how valuable the secrets actually were. Cole pressed himself against the wall beside the front door as footsteps approached across the wooden porch. 2 men entered, their rifles ready and their attention focused on the rooms beyond the entryway. Cole waited until they had moved deeper into the house before slipping outside and beginning his desperate return journey. But luck, which had carried him this far, finally ran out. As Cole reached the canyon entrance to the tunnel, a shout from behind announced his discovery. A mounted patrol had spotted his movement, and within seconds, rifle shots were cracking through the desert air. Cole dove into the tunnel opening as bullets chipped stone around him. Behind him, he could hear men dismounting and pursuing on foot. The narrow passage that had been their salvation was about to become a trap. Racing through the darkness, Cole emerged at the cellar to find the evacuation already in progress. Half the families had made it through to the far exit, but the elderly and children were still waiting their turn. There was no time for an orderly retreat. "They found me," Cole announced breathlessly. "We have maybe minutes before they reach this end of the tunnel." Ayanna immediately began organizing a rearguard action. The younger Apache men took positions near the tunnel entrance while the remaining families were rushed toward the exit. Cole pressed the retrieved documents into Ayanna's hands. "These are what Marcus died for," he said. "Get them to a newspaper in Denver or San Francisco somewhere beyond Hartwell's reach. They prove everything." The sound of men shouting in the tunnel announced that pursuit was imminent. Cole joined the defensive line, knowing that someone had to buy time for the final evacuees to escape. The mathematics of survival were brutally simple. Not everyone was going to make it out. The first territorial soldier to emerge from the tunnel entrance was met by concentrated rifle fire from the Apache defenders. But more men kept coming, and the stone cellar was filling with gun smoke and the screams of wounded men. During a brief lull in the fighting, Cole saw his chance. The tunnel exit was clear, and Ayanna was helping her grandmother toward safety. This was the moment to run, to salvage what they could from the disaster his defiance had created. But as Cole prepared to retreat, he heard something that changed everything. The voice of young Nalnish crying for help from somewhere in the chaos. The 12-year-old boy who had brought the first warning of approaching danger was trapped near the tunnel entrance, wounded and unable to move. Without conscious thought, Cole abandoned his escape route and fought his way through the smoke toward the boy's voice. He found Nalnish pinned beneath a fallen beam, conscious but bleeding from a head wound that painted his young face with streaks of red. "I cannot move my legs," Nalnish whispered in Apache, his eyes wide with fear and pain. Cole lifted the beam and scooped the boy into his arms, turning back toward the exit only to find it blocked by 3 territorial soldiers. Their rifles were trained on him, and their expressions showed no inclination toward mercy. Cole Meridian, the lead soldier, announced formally, "By order of Commissioner Hartwell, you are under arrest for treason against the territorial government." The word treason carried implications that went far beyond simple law enforcement. In the current political climate, treason charges could result in immediate execution without trial. Cole realized that Hartwell had decided to end this confrontation permanently. But before the soldiers could advance, a new voice echoed through the cellar, calm, authoritative, and completely unexpected. "Stand down, Sergeant. This man is under federal protection." The speaker emerged from the shadows near the main entrance, wearing the blue uniform of a United States Army colonel. Behind him came a squad of federal soldiers whose presence immediately changed the tactical situation. The territorial forces found themselves outnumbered and outranked. Colonel Samuel Redwater was a name Cole recognized from newspaper accounts of military negotiations with various Apache bands. But seeing him here now seemed impossible unless the documents you sent to Senator Morrison in Denver arrived yesterday morning, Colonel Redwater announced to Cole. The senator contacted the War Department, and I was dispatched to investigate allegations of territorial corruption. Cole felt his knees nearly buckle with relief and confusion. He had sent no documents to any senator, had no connection to military authorities that could have resulted in this miraculous intervention. But as he looked across the cellar, he saw Ayanna watching with an expression that mixed satisfaction with careful secrecy. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place with stunning clarity. Marcus had not just brought copies of the incriminating documents to Ayanna, he had also sent copies to carefully chosen recipients beyond Hartwell's reach. The janitor who had risked everything to expose the conspiracy had planned for this moment, creating multiple paths to justice in case any single effort failed. Commissioner Hartwell arrived at the cellar entrance just in time to see his carefully planned raid collapsing into legal disaster. The corrupt official who had built his career on brutal efficiency found himself facing federal charges that could result in decades of imprisonment. "Colonel Redwater," Hartwell began, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, "these people are illegally avoiding mandatory relocation orders. I have full territorial authority." "You have nothing," Redwater interrupted coldly. "Your authority has been suspended pending investigation of charges including fraud, conspiracy, and violation of federal treaty obligations. You are under arrest." The transformation was swift and complete. Within an hour, Hartwell and his co-conspirators were shackled and loaded into army wagons for transport to federal detention facilities. The territorial soldiers who had participated in the raid were disarmed and dismissed, their careers effectively ended. But the most significant change was in the legal status of Ayanna's people. Colonel Redwater carried orders from Washington that not only protected them from forced relocation, but also granted them permanent settlement, rights on Cole's ranch in recognition of their cooperation in exposing the corruption. As the sun set over the burned remains of his buildings, Cole found himself sitting beside Ayanna on the stone wall that had protected their vegetable garden from the fire. The immediate danger had passed, but both knew that the deeper challenges of their relationship remained unresolved. "What happens now?" Ayanna asked quietly. Cole looked out over land that would need to be rebuilt from ashes and dreams that would need to be reconstructed from hope. The ranch that had been his monument to individual success would become something different, a community where two cultures could find common ground. "Now we build something better," he said, "something that honors both your people and mine." The letter that had saved them all lay between them on the stone wall, its pages rustling in the evening breeze. But its real power had never been in the words it contained. It had been in the courage of people willing to risk everything for justice. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Cole and Ayanna began planning a future that neither could have imagined when they first met across a narrow creek that separated their worlds. The boundaries were still there, but they no longer seemed insurmountable. The promise that had changed everything was not written on paper, it was written in the choice to stand together against forces that would have destroyed them separately. And as the desert night settled around them, that promise felt strong enough to build a new world upon. 3 months later, the rebuilt Meridian Ranch had become something unprecedented in the Arizona Territory, a thriving community where Apache families worked alongside former cowboys, where traditional medicines were used to treat injuries, and where children learned in both English and Apache languages. Cole stood in the doorway of the new schoolhouse, watching Ayanna teach a mixed class of native and white children the fundamentals of reading and arithmetic. The sight filled him with a satisfaction deeper than any business success he had ever achieved. This was legacy in its truest form, not wealth accumulated but lives transformed. The legal proceedings against Hartwell and his conspirators had proceeded with methodical thoroughness. Federal prosecutors had used the documents Marcus died to protect as the foundation for cases that dismantled an entire network of corruption. 17 territorial officials faced imprisonment, and millions of acres of illegally seized land were being returned to their rightful native owners. But the most significant victory was personal. The territorial legislature, under pressure from federal authorities, had officially recognized Cole and Ayanna's marriage performed according to Apache tradition, but given legal standing under territorial law. The ceremony itself had been simple, conducted by Ayanna's grandfather in the shadow of the red mesa that overlooked their rebuilt home. Now, as Cole watched his wife guide young minds toward futures their parents could never have imagined, he understood that love had indeed been the force that changed everything. Not the romantic notion of love that conquered all obstacles, but the practical love that chose to act despite consequences, that risked everything for the chance to build something better. Nalnish, recovered from his injuries but walking with a slight limp that reminded everyone of that terrible day, approached Cole with a letter that had arrived on the morning stage. The sender's name made Cole smile. Senator Morrison from Denver, who had become an unexpected ally in their fight for justice. The letter contained news that the Meridian Ranch community model was being studied by federal officials as a potential template for peaceful integration throughout the Western Territories. What had begun as a desperate gamble to save one family had become a blueprint for healing the wounds that had torn the frontier apart for generations. As evening approached, Cole joined Ayanna on the porch of their new home, built from stone quarried from the same mesa where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. The house itself was a symbol of their merged worlds, Apache architectural elements integrated with traditional ranch design, creating something entirely new yet rooted in both cultures. "Do you ever regret it?" Ayanna asked, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly where their first child was growing. "Giving up the life you had built?" Cole considered the question seriously. He had lost his reputation as the territory's most feared rancher, had seen his financial empire reduced to a single property, and had gained enemies who would never forgive his betrayal of white supremacy. By most measures, his defiance had cost him everything he had spent his life accumulating. But as he looked out over land where children played together regardless of their heritage, where former enemies had become partners in building something unprecedented, Cole knew that he had gained far more than he had lost. "I did not give up the life I had built," he said finally. "I traded it for the life I was meant to live." The words carried the weight of absolute conviction. Cole Meridian had been a successful rancher, a powerful man who commanded respect through fear and wealth. But Cole, Redwater, the name he had taken to honor both his Apache family and his military ally, was something far more valuable. He was a bridge between worlds that had seemed destined for eternal conflict. As stars appeared in the vast Arizona sky, husband and wife sat in comfortable silence, planning the future of a community that had already begun to change the very definition of what America could become. The letter that had saved them all was now framed in their living room, A reminder that sometimes the greatest victories came not from conquest, but from the courage to choose justice over convenience. In the distance, the sound of laughter echoed from the Apache camp where Cole's former cowboys were learning traditional songs while teaching their hosts the finer points of cattle handling. It was the sound of healing, of barriers dissolving, of a future being born from the ashes of a painful past. The woman who had once whispered that she had been touched and cast aside now sat beside the man who had sworn she would never be left again. And in keeping that promise, they had discovered that love powerful enough to cross cultural boundaries was also powerful enough to change history itself.